Hello, hello, and welcome everyone. We are so happy to have you here. My name is Jennifer Bongora with, of course, Nexford University, as you all are too. And I'm really excited and looking forward to this webinar. My colleague who's here on the webinar with us says it's one of our most highly registered for webinars. So I hope I'm no pressure, but really excited to be here with you. And clearly this is a topic that you all are excited about too. So let us know in the chat who is one of the best communicators that you know, and is there one word that you could use to describe why? So Adiola, Adesoji, Adebie, should go down the list. Anthony Bashir, Bolaji, Charles, Daniel, Deborah, Dr. Shola, Emmanuel Finley, welcome. If you want to let us know who is one of the best communicators that you know. We'll just get started in a moment as the room continues to fill up. If you signed up for the Art of Communication webinar, then you're in the right place with Nexford University. This is one of our exclusive sessions for our learners and alumni, and we are really delighted that you have made the time to be with us. So we'll get started just in a moment. If you do have any questions that come up during the webinar, please use that Q&A instead of the chat, because as you can see, the chat's super busy. Use the Q&A and we will have a space and time at the end to go through your specific questions related to communication at the end. So greetings to everyone, and thank you for your kind greetings and again, making the time to be here. So we'll go ahead and get started because I think the room's filling up, but we have a lot to cover. But I'd love to know, while we wait for this moment, if you would like, you could let me know in the chat someone in your life who is a great communicator, to get us in that mindset of what does it mean to you to be a great communicator, and who in your life is someone who is. So I'm really glad to see all of the nice greetings here. All right. So, and thank you to everyone who's putting their Q&A, their chats there. Okay. Let's see. So here we are. The Art of Communication is this, if this is what you signed up for, you're in the right place. Here is a brief table of contents to give you an idea of what we're going to be covering. I've blocked it out into a few main areas where we've received feedback from both learners, alumni, employers, our faculty at Nexford, our staff, on areas where we would hope to strengthen some of our communication skills, because it really is such a core part of who we are and how we engage with the world, right? So I'll do some introductions if we haven't had the opportunity to connect yet. I'll talk about, why does communication matter? We'll talk about communication at Nexford. Even if you're an alumni, if you're an enrolled learner, of course, you're constantly communicating with Nexford, but even if you're an alumni, what that could look like. Communication and your job search, and to give you some additional framing on what the different ways that we communicate, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. Communication at work, so once you land that job, or if you're currently employed, what that looks like. And then we will have time for Q&A. So again, I will reiterate a few points. Sometimes we get questions on this. You will receive a copy of the presentation. You will receive a recording of the webinar. And please do put your questions in that Q&A so we can keep the chat open for live engagement. And I'm just going to make a couple notes here. And yes, thank you so much to everyone who's sharing your people who are great communicators. So I am making notes of that. And welcome, Kathy from Malawi. That's really exciting. I'm happy you're here, Catherine. So first things first, introductions. My name is Jennifer Bongora, and I am delighted to be Nexford University's Director of Career Innovation. What that means is that I get to spend all of my time thinking about ways to serve our learners and alumni in connecting your education to employment. what I think is so exciting about one of the things, right, about Nexford is how our learners and alumni span an entire spectrum. Some people are fresh out of high school, moving into university. Others have years of work experience and are already working while you're pursuing your MBA or your BBA. And so we have some pretty different career related needs. And I want to make sure that that's all that I care about. And um, that's what I want to make sure that you have the support that you need so that you are getting the jobs and building the careers that you want to support yourselves and your families. My background is in higher education, online learning, and career development. So I've been working over the past 10 years in that field. I'm originally from the United States, but I've worked across the Middle East, North and West Africa, and I currently live in Southern Africa in Malawi. Um, and it has been and continues to be a true honor working with Nexford University learners and alumni who continue to teach me about the ways that I engage with and communicate with others. So thank you for being part of my journey, and we'll go ahead and get started. Just take a look at the chat here. Everyone's saying their greetings. Welcome, Pride, first year BBA. Doing a round of applause for that. That's wonderful. And just making sure, I'm just making notes of some of the people that you all have indicated are great communicators. So we'll go ahead and move over here. So I love this quote when I was thinking about how can we set the stage for a conversation about the art of communication. And I want us to think about too, the title of this webinar is not the science of communication, okay? It's the art of communication, which means there are lots of interpretations about what good communication means for different people. So I saw this quote says, a lot of problems in the world would be solved if we talked to each other instead of about each other. If that resonates with you like it did for me, then you're in the right place. And I hope this webinar will continue to help you build and strengthen those communication skills. So think about in your life, whether it's in your personal realm, the professional realm, and those times when you're talking with your family or friends about that one person, that one colleague, that one boss who always gets you going, who doesn't understand you, who you don't understand. The root of a lot of conflict in the world, interpersonal, at any level, right? Individual, between a couple people, between many people, it can often be tied back to communication and expectations around communication. And something that, of course, we notice at Nexford University is we are based in Washington, D.C., and we are a global university serving learners and alumni around the world who are not only based in many countries, but who are come from many different backgrounds. So, for example, I'm from the United States, but I live in Malawi. The communication that happens, there's a lot of nuance to it, right? So wherever you might be, you're definitely interacting with people outside of your home country, and you're interacting with people in your home country. And no matter what, there's opportunity for misunderstanding and understanding, right? So this is a quote that I thought really summed up and collected some idea, helped us ground us in thinking, if I'm having, an ongoing, seeing a pattern in communication issues, you want to think about, of course, the other person could be part of the opportunity, right? And also, but like I tell my children and like I tell myself, the only thing I can control is me, right? You will spend your life exhausting yourself trying to change other people. And so the only things that we can really change are ourselves, especially when it comes to our communication. So let's get into it. First, I want to start off with, why does communication even matter, right? Of course, when you're thinking now too about artificial intelligence, robots taking our job, we think at Nexford that communication is only increasing in its importance as our work, as our lives cross borders and boundaries. The ability to effectively communicate with people, again, from your own country or from backgrounds that are different from yours, is only going to gain in importance. So I've outlined 3 ways here of why communication really even matters. Well, first, you have effective collaboration. So imagine any project that you're working on. And again, I've lived now abroad outside of my home country, and I've lived um, in my home country, and I find that the tools and strategies for communicating effectively really apply no matter which background or culture you're coming from. Because too, you think about in the United States, and I'm sure in your own home countries too, even if you're from one region in the country, in the United States, I'm from the South, we communicate really differently in general from people from the North and people from the West, okay? West Coast, right? And maybe it's similar where you're from. So first, I think about effective collaboration and what that means. I'm going to focus here a little bit more on our professional lives because that's where my mind goes, thinking about career innovation. And a lot of these tips are going to apply to your personal life as well. So effective collaboration, what does that mean? That means, when we set a certain objective for a work project, that we are able to have, diminish and reduce conflict when we're working on that together. We're able to achieve that goal that we've set out, and we're able to do it without, causing anxiety or conflict among one another. Next is achieving your goals. Think about one of the goals that you have for yourself right now. Is it to get a new job? Is it to get a promotion? Is it to stay in your current role and do it really well? Is it to change companies? Is it to change industries? Whatever your goal is, communication is going to be really at the foundation of your ability to achieve it. This is also somewhere, thinking about the achieving your goals, where you are going to be, and you have to, if you are not already, you really have to become the expert in understanding the context, your context and how your goal fits into that, right? So in terms of letting people know what it is, what goal you want to achieve, and knowing what is appropriate. How can I approach someone in a way to let them know what goals I want to achieve, whether that's your manager, whether that is other colleagues. This is something that is truly cross-cultural, or, I would say has cultural nuance in what is effective and what is appropriate, right? Someone from Germany is going to communicate with their manager or boss differently than somebody from Mexico, than someone from the United States, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, while we all do not have to become, certified professional communicators, we do need to increase our emotional intelligence, that EQ, and in understanding and observing the ways people around us are communicating and what those norms are. And that is really that's essential, going to be essential to achieving whatever goal you've set out, and observing the norms that are taking place around you to make sure that you are operating within those norms. And if you aren't comfortable with what those norms are, so for example, if you are in a workplace that feels toxic, people are yelling, people are disrespectful, that is a norm, a communication norm or cultural norm that you could observe, or workplace norm rather, and you can choose to remove yourself from it. So next, communication matters when we're building relationships. So I asked you all who some of the best communicators are that you know, and what's one word that describes them. Many of you named celebrities, Chimamanda Adichie, Barack Obama, Steve Jobs. We have Larry King, Joel Osteen. These are all professional communicators, right? And at the same time, I wonder if you bring it back to the personal level in your life. Do you have one family member who is really good about staying in touch or keeping everybody in the loop? Do you have a best friend who always remembers birthdays and special events, or is the great logistics and planning person, and making sure everyone knows that information of where to meet and when? Think about on that personal level, who are people in your day-to-day life who are good communicators, and think about why they are. And because that's going to give you some tools or some insight into what's important to you about communication. Because at its core, communication matters because it really is a representation of our values. And when you can approach your work and life from a values perspective, you're going to be able to have a lot more alignment, which creates harmony, harmony with your and goals in life, and what you are doing to achieve them. And then, of course, that creates harmony in you. And then that improves your ability to do more and better work in the world. I'm just going to take a look at the chat to make sure we are, and I don't know, maybe someone, Aziz, maybe we were saying this at the same time. True communication is a representation of our values in life. I don't know, you maybe have said that, or maybe you're quoting me, I'm not sure. I love that. Adumake says, my mom is your best communicator. Someone else has a brother. And other people, this is what's exciting and interesting about communication. You might hear, oh, my mom is the worst communicator I know. My brother's the worst or the best, right? It's different for everyone. And I want you to think about why that is. Because again, communication can be quite personal, and we often communicate with ourselves. But for the most part, we're thinking about communication in the context of other people. So when we reflect on what makes other people great communicators, that starts to help us understand our own values, so that then we can think about, how does that color other aspects of our lives. So one more, someone else has a cousin here. Okay, I'm just making some notes. So, okay, we've talked about why communication matters for effective collaboration with colleagues, whether they're in your hometown, in your home country, or in another part of the world. We've talked about it's important for achieving the goals you've set out for yourself, and thinking, how can I communicate my goals to myself, understand what those goals are, then also think about how is it appropriate to communicate those goals with other people so they can help me achieve them. And then finally, it's important related to building relationships, because communication really is at the foundation of how we engage with other people in the world, again, no matter where they are. And thank you to everyone who's adding. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the Q&A there, so that we can have them to cover at the end. Okay, great. So I love this quote as well. Again, thinking about who you are, you're part of a global university with learners and alumni now in over 100 countries around the world, which is truly remarkable. I know I'm biased, but you think about that, it's very few people in reality who are like you, in that you're interacting and engaging with people from all over the world through your education on a consistent basis. And at the core, I saw somebody put in the chat that they think they're the best communicator that they know. Knowing yourself and having that self-awareness can be the first step to being an effective and clear communicator. So you really, you have to work on yourself before you can start to improve communications with other people. So I saw this quote that, to effectively communicate, we must realize that we are all different in the way we perceive the world, and use this understanding as a guide to our communication with others. So remember when I talked in the beginning of the presentation about, think about that friend or family member that you have. Maybe it's a cousin, maybe it's a childhood best friend who you call on your way home from work and you say, not again. That boss or that colleague, they did this or they did that. We all have somebody, right? I'm not asking for names. Please do not put names of who you call or who you talk about. But over time, one, our friends are going to stop. Well, I'm sure if they're good friends, they won't stop. But over time, people get tired of hearing that same story about the same person who's doing the same thing, right? And at some point, we all have to look internally. Now, again, we cannot take on the burden of other people being poor communicators, right? And we also don't want to let other people's poor communication impact ourselves and drag us down. So what we can do, like I said, the only thing we can control is ourselves, is start to think a little bit more critically about how we are perceiving the world around us and what our role is in improving or changing our communication strategies to meet other people where they are. And this is something that it's not going to be a one size fits all approach. The way we communicate with our mom is different the way than we communicate with our boss, is different than the way that we communicate with a colleague or someone who we are at school with, right? There are lots of different ways that we communicate, and hopefully you're going to have you'll have authenticity throughout, right? I'm not saying that you need to change who you are as a person in different settings. And what I am saying is you do need to think about what is appropriate in different settings, and think about what is how are other people perceiving the way I communicate, and am I aware of how I communicate with other people? This is not easy, and so I don't want anyone to be sitting on the other side of the screen here and thinking I'm out here saying that it's easy to be really truly aware of how we communicate and how others perceive it. There's multiple types of self-awareness, right? We have the awareness of self, how we are, and then there's an awareness of how others perceive us. So we're going to talk about, all of that in here. I'm just again taking a look at the chat to make sure I'm catching everything. I love that. Someone was saying that one of the best communicators they know is somebody who can use words to solve family misunderstandings and promote unity. And I think that is a beautiful way of thinking of why communication is important. How can we promote unity and solve and prevent misunderstandings? Whether, again, we all have it in our own families or in the workplace. And so I'm just taking here, and I want to make sure I'm recognizing that everyone's saying. So Chukwe, sorry, your whole name isn't showing up. Chukwe Mida, let's see, says, or Emeka, sorry. I find that people hear but don't listen to what's being said and what's not being said. And that is something that is definitely important to consider. So if you have questions, please do put those in the Q&A and we can cover those at the end. So we've talked a little bit about why communication matters. And now I want to touch briefly on some of the different ways that you right today, this week, this month might be interacting with different people in your life. So first, we're going to talk about communication at Nexford. And how are you engaging with faculty or staff like me? So there's 3 ways I outlined here, and I'm happy to receive in the chat if there are other ways that I'm missing. This is not exhaustive. So you might be asking for help on an assignment. And I hear you when, there's pressure out there. You've got an assignment due in a couple hours. You're running up against the clock. You're stressed. And so you reach out to a faculty and you say, I need this now. I need this information right now, exclamation point, all caps, right? That might be, or someone might say, recognize the situation. Dear professor, I understand, recognizing the context. I understand I'm running up against the clock and emotions are high. Could you please help me understand XYZ? We see all types of communication happening at Nexford. And again, communication can be highly emotional, and feelings are involved, and that makes things beautiful. It also can complicate things, right? And with this webinar, again, we're not all going to become master communicators, but what I'm hoping it brings to you is some additional strategies and opportunities to reflect on your communication style and how you're interacting with the world around you, so that you can, again, control the only thing that you can right now, which is yourself. So think about the last time that you've asked for help from your faculty or from your success advisor, from your career, director of career innovation. What does that look like? Have you communicated with patience? Have you communicated with empathy? Have you communicated with care? These are things that are two-way streets, right? You think about a road. Does it go in one direction, or do you have a road that goes in two directions? Or you might have a road that sometimes it's one direction and it's small enough that sometimes it's the other, right? Communication is frequently a two-way street where you have your communication going out, other people's coming in, and then maybe, additional coming in other directions. So it can, again, it's such a simple word, but it carries so much within it. And again, when you start introducing the cross-cultural element, there is a lot for you to be aware of, but there's a lot for other people to be aware of too, right? I want to share this and saying it's on all of us to continue to strengthen our skills as communicators so that we can, like one of our colleagues here said on the chat, promote, solve misunderstandings and promote unity. So next, when you're asking for clarification, again, are you thinking about how your words are being perceived on the other side? And maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm thinking about how other people are communicating to me, right? I want to ask you to stop there because, again, we cannot control, no matter if it's at Nexford, at another place, it's difficult. You can't control somebody else and the way they're coming to you, but you can think about how you are coming across to them. And then thinking too about when you're completing assignments. This is a way that you communicate when you are actually, finishing your homework or your projects that you have. Because, and we'll talk about this, like the different ways of communication, whether it's spoken, written, all the way, the way that I am coming across to you by video, the way I'm coming across to you by sound, maybe you're looking and reading the captions. These are all different ways that I am communicating with you. And all of them are sending a message about, how I care about or value you or the context that I'm in. And this is something, again, that I want to reiterate is highly contextual. But when you are operating professionally, academically, in a global context, you are the person who is choosing to enter an intercultural relationship, right? Academic or professional. And so, again, I hope you see it as an opportunity, but it's a chance for all of us to reflect on, I'm choosing to enter Nexford University, or I've chosen to be an alumni here, where I know I have fellow learners who are from different countries, communicating different ways, faculty and staff who are around the world. And again, we want to remind all of us that about the opportunity to think, how are my communication standards or strategies the same and different from the people around me? And this, so I'll take a pause here again, and I'm going to look at, I'm appreciate everyone sharing these great opportunities. And if you have specific questions, please do put those in the chat, um, because then I'll be able to track them in one place. So I'm wanting to notice, yeah. And if you have comments, so this is great. I appreciate everyone sharing. And please do share your feedback and put those in the Q&A so I can keep them all in one place and I'll address them at the end. And this is yet, another example of a way that we're communicating with each other, right? And how we're listening to one another, and sharing an expectation and meeting it with one another, right? Because also I can tell, and I know it's true to, personally, again, communication carries a lot of emotion and a lot of feeling. So there's a lot to that. So next, I wanted to touch base on some ways that we communicate in our job search. Again, of course, I can't stop thinking about that because that's my job, but I wanted to highlight some areas that you may be consciously aware of, unconsciously engage with, and just so that you can reflect on how you are showing up in these different areas in your job search. First is your online presence. More than ever in a world where we are connected digitally, we really have to be aware about our online presence. I don't only mean on social media channels, right? So, of course, those are the obvious. You have professionally, you have LinkedIn, but you have Facebook, you've got Instagram, if you're on Threads now, Twitter, wherever it is that you show up online, that is a reflection on, those are social media, public or private. That's a way that you're showing up and communicating with other people, whether you're actually, writing comments or posts or just in the information that you have posted. I also really always like to bring up an example, unfortunately, I'll say from WhatsApp. Many of us spend, I don't know if you want to look at your settings, how much time you spend a day on WhatsApp. For me, it's a lot. I'm sure for you, it's a lot too. But this is an area where I like to bring up something because I think it brings home a real example of how we communicate when we're not even necessarily aware of it. So for LinkedIn, but let me start first, share, thinking about our social media presence. We know that we can make certain accounts private or certain things not visible, but ultimately I like to reinforce time and time again with people. If you have put something online, I would really not consider it to be private. People can screenshot, people can record their phone. Nothing that you are sharing is really private. And so if you don't want it to be, it's like telling a secret to somebody. If you want it to be a really secret, maybe you can only tell your mother, but if you start telling people outside of a parent, a mother that you trust or a dad, you can be sure that you're going to hear it from somebody else, like, oh, someone told me something, so on and so on, right? That they weren't supposed to tell me. So if you don't want it shared or, associated with you, don't share it online. An example that I share on the online presence that I cannot stop thinking about is I interacted with somebody once on WhatsApp, someone who had a very high level job, who you could potentially, but not always, of course, assume had high emotional intelligence, that they understood communication because they'd reached a certain level in their career. And so we would WhatsApp as friends message on WhatsApp. Of course, you have the status updates on WhatsApp. So I would watch the status updates of my, friends and people I'm communicating with on WhatsApp. And over time, I had to actually unfollow this person on WhatsApp status because they would share, and I'm not even exaggerating, and I'm sure you've seen it in your life too, right? 10 to 15 memes a day about going out, and I'm talking every day, not just on the weekends, right? About going out and drinking and meeting friends at the bar and showing up to work hungover and so on and so forth. And I was actually shocked because when I interacted with this person live, I did not get that side of that person. And I think it wasn't that they were being inauthentic, I hope, but it was just a different setting, different context, different communication. Now, this person maybe didn't give a second thought. They thought, oh, I'm using WhatsApp, I'm just sharing something fun. I think it's fun. I think it's funny. Um, but over time, I could not stop associating with this person. Like, well, one, I think they have a problem with alcohol. Two, I don't think that they understand how they are being perceived by other people, which to me shows low emotional intelligence, which means that that influences your communication with other people, and really having that level of self-awareness of not only knowing what I'm communicating to you, but communication is also thinking about how are others, receiving what I am sharing. And I share that example because that person worked for a very high profile project and funder. And in my opinion, they are a reflection. We are all a reflection, right? Of our families, first of ourselves, of our families, of the schools that we attend, of the companies that we work for. And that is not to say that, again, we have to hide certain parts of our lives, but it really is that we need to be aware of how are you representing yourself? Because again, at its core, communication is a representation of your values, but it's also you are a reflection, whether you are an official ambassador of Nexford or not, you are an ambassador of Nexford. People, they know you're attending, you are representing our university. I, as an employee, am representing Nexford at all times, right? And so this is something in the online presence, I should have made it like a little bit bigger. That again, in the formal and informal ways that we communicate online, of course, this is true for in person too, but online can even be more prevalent and global. We really need to take a moment and think, how am I being the best version or representation, right, of myself? Because that impacts, again, of course, how people perceive you. And then we all know the ripple effects that has. You think about job referrals. When somebody wants to refer, my colleague Roshan, somebody like this who I know has her communication and her brand, they are intertwined, and it's somebody who you could be like, yes, I want to refer this person for any role because I know that they are great. Over time, we're building how people perceive us in the world through all of our small actions that build up to the whole of how people perceive us to be. And again, at that core is communication, whether it's verbal or digital. So I will cover the other areas that are listed on the screen briefly, but I really wanted to think about that online presence part because it's can be so critical of how sometimes we don't even realize that we're being perceived necessarily by others. We think maybe we're communicating with a certain population, but then in reality, our words and our actions go even much further. So then thank you to everyone for sharing your questions in the Q&A, because that's really helpful for us to keep it in one spot. Someone asked, did they do their work well though? And this is something that's interesting, and thank you for the question, B. Even I don't work with this person, so I don't know if they did their work well, but before I would even go into working, if that would ever happen, my perception of this person is now influenced. Now, that is something that, maybe I would get into a work situation, and after following them on WhatsApp and seeing people sharing a bunch of silly, this one was specifically, about going out to bars. But there could be other things that are culturally or appropriate or inappropriate. But again, especially when you're working for international organizations like this person was, the burden or the onus, the opportunity is on all of us to understand what is and isn't appropriate in our own culture and across different cultures. And even if it doesn't impact your actual work, even if you're like an A+ person, in the workplace, it is influencing how people are perceiving your work to be, right? And it is a form of communication. Someone else says, I've unfollowed so many people because of their negative emotional intelligence in their media presence, right? So thank you for your comments here and engagement. I appreciate it. So next, and I'm just keeping an eye on time, we have our career materials. So your resume, your CV, your cover letter, your LinkedIn profile. Even though you might not think of that as a form of communication, those are representations of who you are as a professional and who you're going to be. So you think about typos, you think about the content within. Yeah, it's important to just take a moment, be aware of what you're putting out into the world and thinking, is this communicating the best version of me? If you're not sure, reach out to somebody else. This is where you have a great, if you reach out to 2 or 3 other people that you trust, think about people who are great communicators in your life. It could be your mom, your cousin, your brother, yourself. But of course, it's great to get other insight because you want to think how, of course, you think how you're putting things out into the world, but you want to get that feedback on how are others perceiving your career materials or whatever it may be. You have networking here. This one is critical, right? Networking is very important to your job. And what I mean here is not schmoozy, meeting somebody, sharing a business card, and it being a very transactional relationship, but really more so how you're building real meaningful relationships that are going to set up the foundation of your career for your career success. When you think about if you reach out to somebody and you say, and I've had this happen to me, someone who I don't know reaches out and says, hi, Jennifer, help me find a job. Now, this is not an Nexford learner, right? But somebody who I don't know, who I've never interacted with. How do you, and this is something that we could all have a different answer for, but I do wonder, how does that make that me or, feel? Hi, Jennifer, help me have a job. Well, I don't know who you are. I don't know what type of job you're looking for. You haven't communicated, how you found me to reach out to in the first place. There's a lot of missing information, right? When you're networking and if you're thinking about reaching out to somebody to ask for help, I want to say first, many people in the world want to help other people, right? Whether that's with your career, with your life, with lots of things, right? I hope, want to help others. And little asterisk point, the way that we interact and engage with others is going to influence how people support you in your path. And that's just the truth of it, right? I want you to think about any frustration. And I do that. I try to do this myself and it is hard. It can be a painful experience, but I want you to think about, a frustrating experience that you've had when you've asked somebody else for help or for something and you didn't receive it. And of course, maybe it could just be that person wasn't able to help you for whatever reason, but you really have to take a step back and think, what am I actually putting in this message to make sure that the person on the other side, I think at the core of it, feels seen and heard as a person. As we again advance in our 4th industrial revolution and beyond, artificial intelligence, all of these tools that are making supposedly communication better, faster, so on and so forth. Our ability to be human, to connect with other people is only going to get more important, because what makes us human is, is our ability to communicate and engage and interact with other people. But if we are not taking the time to be curious, to be empathetic, to really think about how somebody else is feeling in a situation, we're never going to be able to communicate well and reduce and eliminate those frustrations that happen in all of our daily communication, right? Next, we communicate, of course, in an interview. And here is where, if you're going into an interview, you have to understand what are the norms of interviewing at this place of employment. Am I sending messages that to the recruiter saying, where are you? What are you doing? Why haven't you responded to my email? Why haven't you, take a moment back and think, is that the way that somebody else wants to be communicated to or with? Now, we all have our own motivations and self-interests, and that, I think we could get into a whole nother debate around, different, whether that is good if we're being self-motivated or not. But at its core, if you are trying to engage with somebody else, you really, the opportunity, I will say, is on you to take a step back and think, how am I communicating with someone else in the way that they want to be communicated with and to? And sometimes it honestly comes down to, hey, I'm sensing that we're not on the same page as we're communicating. Is there something that I could be doing differently to communicate in a way that works for you, right? Sometimes it takes asking. We spend a lot of time speculating, maybe in an interview process of, oh, I think the norm is to follow up every hour, every 2 or 3 hours on what's the update, what's the status. And that might be, maybe at the beginning, this is managing expectations in communication, is setting up and asking. If you don't know what the norms are in an interview, you need to know the questions. We need to, it's like a conscious incompetence. We need to know what we don't know and ask for clarification. Because again, we are all representing at first ourselves when we communicate. But when you start applying for jobs and you have Nexford on your resume or CV, you have your former places of employment, you really are a representation of all of the things that you've done before, the companies, the academic institutions. And it's just so critical that there's a saying that JFK, an American president, said. He said, a rising tide lifts all boats. Now, that maybe has a different meaning in the era of climate change, but we think about when you go out and you're applying for jobs and you're interviewing and someone sees Nexford University, not to put too much pressure on you, but you are representing all of us in this digital, Zoom room and the thousands of learners and alumni beyond, because people will start to associate your academic institutions and, again, of course, your former employers with you. They can't help it. That's who you are connecting with. And I'm proud to be a part of the Nexford community, because there are so many wonderful representations of who we are, what we stand for, what our values are. And there are many opportunities for all of us to take a step back and think, how, when I'm interviewing and the way I'm engaging with different employers, whether that's recruiters or hiring managers, how is this being a best representation of who I am and the institutions that I represent? And then finally, we have our thank you notes and follow-up, where you're sending people, thanking them for their time, asking for an update on that interview, which is appropriate to do. And again, you just want to make sure that in the tone of our messages that we are communicating with people in a way that is received and perceived the way we want it to be received, right? So finally, we've talked about why communication is important. We've talked about communication in your job search. We've talked about communication at Nexford and how we interact with people. And I want to take a moment to think about our communication at work. And of course, this applies to all of the other areas that we've touched on as well. I'm just going to take a moment and take a look at the comments and see if there are ones that I can address here. And again, if you have questions, please do take those questions and put them in the Q&A, which is a separate section from the chat, so we have it all in one place. So someone here, Ronald, is sharing that they believe every corporate professional should have a personal branding and communication style and moderate the amount of information and how they present information in the public space. Communication creates perceptions. It really does, whether we want it to or not, it does. And a copy of this you will get a copy of this recording Absolutely. So thank you for those questions that you're putting in the Q&A. I appreciate that. So here, I wanted to touch base because I see we have a lot of questions, so I'll make this one I'll speedy so we can have time for the Q&A. When you think about how we communicate at work, there are so many different ways. Maybe, you have Teams, so you have chat messages, you have email, you have Zoom calls, you have video, you have your actual work products. The work that you're producing is a form of communicating, of course. So we have that spoken. Um, we have written, we have nonverbal, which would be my body language, how I am, whether I'm making eye contact or not, whether, if I have my body closed, whether I have my body open and alert, whether I'm facing you, whether again, am I looking at my phone while I'm talking to you? Again, any way that you are communicating, digitally with writing messages, whether you are choosing to I will say control, but like shape how you are perceived by others or not, people are perceiving your communication in a certain way. And so this is, again, no one, even these people that we shared here, Chimamanda Adichie, Steve Jobs, MLK, no one is a perfect communicator. But all of those people, I can guarantee, certainly those professionals, they spend a lot of time and a lot of money thinking about how they communicate and how it's received by other people. Because again, if you have somebody standing on a corner shouting out to other people, they're communicating, but they are not caring how other people are receiving or perceiving that communication. But you, as a professional, you have a really great opportunity to take a moment, which you're doing in this webinar, and think, before I send that Teams message or that Slack message or G-chat to somebody, I want to think, how is what I'm writing going to be perceived by that person? And it is important. And I do think these micro opportunities are really what build into our larger engagement and with the world and society around us, right? So if you have a colleague, and I'll pick on, just because it's, of course I can use my own example, my colleague Roshan, who is someone I work with all the time. I want to think about, how can I communicate in a way that is going to be well received? Because I want, again, we think about those, why does communication matter? I want to have effective communication and collaboration so that I can achieve the goals that we've set out. When we decide to host a webinar with Nexford, I'm not going to say to Roshan, hey, put together this webinar so that I can do my job. No, I want to think about, one, understand the context. Maybe I'm going to think about, where is Roshan sitting in the world and what's happening around her? Sometimes this is something that I think really, and this is working in a global context, that we do not spend enough time being empathetic to thinking about what is happening actually physically in the environment around you. And I mean here, and I know that you all will be empathetic to this. And of course, you're probably seeking other people to be more empathetic to you. But I think we can only control ourselves, right? And be conscious about, does this person have electricity today? Do they have running water? Is there something politically happening around them? These are things that can happen no matter where someone is sitting in the world, that we needed to all take a moment in our spoken, written communication and think, if someone else is having a stressful day or is in a stressful environment, how is me, when I'm either writing to them or getting on a call and saying, why didn't you do that? Why didn't you give that project to me, or give me that information I needed sooner? There are so many things happening that we don't know and aren't aware of, that influence our communication, how we deliver it, how we receive it, that we have to be sensitive to. And nobody else can be sensitive to it but you, right? No one else can do that for you. And that's what is going to make you a great communicator, but ultimately a better person, is by taking a moment. And maybe you don't spend all your time, and I do want to harp on this for a moment, but this doesn't mean that you have to spend all your time on news sites checking in on what's happening in the world around, but really taking that moment to understand and check in with somebody. Hey, how are you? How are things in your part of the world? And maybe that part of the world is in your country, but maybe that's in a different country, to understand. And then usually it'll come out. Yeah, oh, this happens to me in Malawi, but it can happen in the US, right, too, or other places. Oh, it's been a stressful morning. They cut power today, X, Y, Z, so on and so forth. Or, here's what's happening politically around us. Um, Being sensitive to that and taking that moment before we uh, maybe interact aggressively or are demanding of other people can really improve not only our human connection with one another, which is really at it the most essential, but then again, achieving whatever goal that you have set out for yourself. So take a moment to really think about, for yourself, how are you speaking with your colleagues in a way that they are, receiving well or not? Do you consistently see patterns, either positive or negative, in your workplace after you speak with people, after you write? Do you feel understood or misunderstood? How is your body language adjusting? And maybe you don't use video, so maybe are you in person? Are you remote? A lot of this influences our communication, right? And your digital communication, again, like posting on social media, or how you are sending, different emails or whatever it might be. Um, I specifically didn't, want to get too much into I didn't want to get into specific cultural norms here, but at the same time, because we are representing different countries, different parts of the world, different backgrounds and experiences. And this webinar, the intention here is that you take a moment to just think about all of these different facets and ways that you're engaging with potential employers, and people around the world, and how you're being perceived and representing the different facets of your life. And yeah, so let's see. And again, I appreciate everyone putting your questions in the chat. So before we move into the Q&A, I have a little notebook here. Maybe you're on your phone. Can you see my notebook? Is it being blurred out? Sorry. I want you to take a moment, and we are going to get to the Q&A, just a few of them. And what I'm going to do is, I don't think we're going to have time for the full Q&A. So what I will commit to doing is responding to that, and maybe we'll send a follow-up email, I believe today, with a copy of the recording and presentation, if not tomorrow morning. And then I think I'll need to do either a follow-up blog post to address all of these wonderful questions that you have, to make sure that we are addressing them. So I want us to take a moment, though, and write down 2 to 3 things that you plan on doing after this webinar, or your takeaways from the session, because this is our metacognition here of how have we learned something today. And by actually taking a moment to reflect on what it is we've learned, it's going to help further cement that and inform our actions beyond. So if you can let us know in the chat something that you think you're going to do following this webinar. If someone says they're going to improve their online presence, Kahinde, that's awesome. And again, reach out to a fellow Nexford learner. There are over 200 and I think, how many people do we have on this webinar? A lot, 225 at least. You can find at least one other person in here who could help you after you improve your own profiles. Take a look and say, here are some of my values, here's what's important to me. Are you receiving that when you see what I put out online? Is that how I'm being perceived? And they can help you understand yes or no. Someone else says they're going to be sensitive in their communication. Thank you, Peter. I think that probably encapsulates a lot of what I've shared. We all need to be sensitive, more sensitive in how we're communicating with the world around us. Someone else is going to improve their online presence. John's going to improve their collaboration and project management skills. That's great. Someone's going to work on improving the clarity of my communication, increase their online presence. That's great. Someone's going to start networking more. and think, I love this. Ensure whatever I post out there is informative and a good message that I'm passing across. That's great. Um, so someone else, and what I love too about communication, and when I asked you all to think about who are good communicators in your life, I think all of you had an example, even though not everyone shared one, many of you did. You shared celebrities, and then you shared people in your life. Take some time right when this webinar ends, if you have a few moments, and think about, what is it about my mom, my brother, my cousin, myself, that I think are what makes them a good communicator. And again, some people, and I saw this in the message, it might be because you're the loudest or the most convincing. Other people, I bet you don't have, we all communicate in different ways, and there's not only one way that is the best way to communicate. So, but for you, when you make a list of people who you think are good communicators, start to draw out what are the actual attributes that make them good communicators to you. Someone else is going to improve on themselves and their ability to communicate properly, consider emotional intelligence and its relationship to communication, improve my online presence and be sensitive while communicating to make sure I'm well understood and I'm being a good listener. And I think we didn't spend as much time talking about the listening, and I loved that somebody at the beginning shared that it's like good listening is not only speaking, but also waiting for others and soaking up and understanding what they're sharing. That's really important. And we'll have to do another session on this. So thank you so much. I really appreciate being aware of my communication style. You all have shared such incredible takeaways, and how you're going to be more aware about your own presence and engage with other people around you. So thank you so much. Oh my gosh. Oh, proofreading my message, Olusola, that's awesome. I'm constantly using my spell check, and that is one way that we're communicating, right? Even spell check, our grammar, and now we have so many great tools that can help us do that. I love all of these takeaways, improving on my communication with people in the workplace. I think sometimes too, it's if we are sensing a lack of harmony with people around us, if you're really having conflict with somebody else at work, I know it's hard, and sometimes it takes, and this is again where this is a cultural norm, how can you get to the root of the issue and even maybe ask somebody, hey, I'm sensing we're having this communication barrier. What can I do to help improve the way that we're interacting with one another, right? And that's not easy. And sometimes you have to directly address it. But again, culturally, you'll know what's the most appropriate way to get to the root of solving that misunderstanding. I love that. Ooh, I love this one. Sorry, I have to keep sharing these because someone says, I'll start keeping in touch with people and bosses or customers that have helped me in the past. And oh my gosh, this is such a great takeaway, because when we communicate with other people, I love keeping people in touch with, if you ask somebody for help or you help somebody else, it feels so good when later on, even whether it's months or years, if you reach back out to that person, think about how you would feel if you say, reaching out to that professor who helped you with a recommendation, or a former, colleague who sent on a referral for you, or whatever it might be, and giving them that update on how things are going now, communicating with them, what changed as a result of their engagement and interaction in your life. I know I would feel amazing, and I'm sure that they will too when you communicate with them how things are going now. So that's wonderful. You all are incredible. So I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for making the time to be here today and talk about the art of communication. We had like a record registration, so much engagement here in the chat, so many wonderful questions that I will find a way we're gonna to answer. And I'm just so sorry that we didn't have time. Let me see if I can let's see, Rashan, do I have time to answer just a couple questions, or do we need to wrap up? I just want to touch base and make sure. Okay, great. I'm going to answer a couple questions. Thank you. She said yes. So I'll go to the Q&A now because I just got caught up in how wonderful your responses are in the chat. So here, I'll go there. And maybe I will just stop sharing this so I can see the chat here. So this first question is, how can one initiate effective communication in the workplace where everybody is only working for personal interest? That is a powerful question. And I think here, again, you can only control how you are communicating with other people. And I'd love for you to make a list, and I don't know how large your workplace is, but generally we're engaging with a certain amount of people most often. So I'd encourage you to think about, who is it that you're working with most often? Make a list of those people. And sometimes it's really on a piece of paper. Who are the 3 to 5 or maybe up to 10 people who you are working with? And maybe make sure that no one's going to come across your list, right? But can you write down, how can you articulate what is frustrating you about their communication style or the way that they are interacting, and how does that show up? People working for their personal interest. Many people are working in their self-interest, and we can work in our self-interest and still have effective relationships with other people. So what I would encourage you here is to really understand, what is it that you find challenging about the ways that you're interacting with those other colleagues? And then once you are able to articulate and understand what it specifically is, maybe it comes down to having a one-on-one conversation with somebody. Maybe it's maybe you host a session at your workplace of, here are, where everyone's bringing in, we're crowdsourcing, what are some common misunderstandings that we're seeing that are impacting our ability to still deliver on our work, and how can we address them? So I would say, if you feel comfortable and safe enough to talk with somebody one-on-one, you need to understand, again, yourself first, but then also, what are their motivations? I think sometimes you find somebody who might be really difficult to work with, then when we better understand that person, maybe they're having a really hard time at home, wherever where they're living, with their partner, with their children, with their parents, and it gives you, helps you develop a little bit deeper sense of empathy about how that is having that ripple effect and how they're engaging with the world around them. I think when we can understand people and one another more deeply, that can give us greater insight into how we are, how that impacts our interactions with other people. I hope that's helpful. If someone becomes a go-to place by his or her colleagues to share their feelings and ask for advice, can it be an indicator that the person is having good communication skills? Ooh, I love this question. I think so. And it probably means, if you are that person, or if you're maybe thinking of somebody else, you are probably a really good listener, and you're making people feel seen and heard. And I think that can be one of the most core ways that we, that improves the world around us, is when you really listen to somebody, right? Not a distracted someone. I'm sure that people are not going to the person over and over again who is like, oh, here, I'm listening to you. I'm listening. I'm over here doing something else. I'm looking at something else. No, that would, I think, mean at least you're being a great listener. And that is a very important part of communication. So yes. I wonder, hopefully we can see these questions after. So that one's done. How do you voice your opinion or idea across to a difficult boss or superior in the office without shooting yourself in the foot? Oof, this is such a good question. And I'll say I've experienced this personally, right? I've had a time where I sensed conflict in the workplace between myself and somebody else. And what I do is, I start writing out what some of the things that are frustrating me. Don't put anyone in the email, the to address, right? But write it out, read it aloud to yourself, the message. Personally, I call my mom, I read the message out loud to her. Maybe you have a close friend who is willing to listen to you and take the time. The most important thing when we're talking about sensitive topics or difficult people or difficult situations, you have got to be thoughtful, right? You have to take time, because it might feel good to get something off your chest, but absolutely you need to be thinking about down the road, how does this impact my relationship with this person, my work, my ability to get promoted, that there's a reality to that, right? We can't operate in a vacuum and think I can just say whatever I want and I had to get it off my chest and I had to say it. That's not reality. That is somebody living in, their own made up world. Because whatever we do say and communicate, it's going to be perceived by somebody and there will be ripple effects. So in my opinion, in this situation, you have to give it a little bit of time to really understand what kind of communication does your boss appreciate? Would they want you to communicate on a video call? Would they prefer to receive an email where they can process the information? Should it be a formal, as part of your one-on-one? Should you set up a separate time to talk about it outside of your one-on-one? This is where your own emotional intelligence and your ability to be aware of the context and the situation around you is going to be super important. So I would first say thank you for this thoughtful question, but again, write out, or however you process information, maybe it's a talk to text, maybe you're writing it out. What are the 3 to 5 things or the 1 to 2 things that are creating a lack of harmony? Can you be specific with your examples? And then are you providing solutions? I'm noticing that we're having we're running, and why is it important? Of course, you're thinking about a business case. Why is this relevant or to the business? And then how are you part of the solution? Here are things that I can do to help improve. And I'd love to talk about how we can find a solution together, right? Because it's not only the other person changing. We all play a role. That's a wonderful question, though. Thank you. So this is a difficult one too. How do you communicate politely but still maintain a strong and direct diction? And I think some people do think that there's only I can be aggressive and send all capital messages and lots of exclamation points, and you need to send me this now, or else I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z. I think here it's looking at the situation, thinking how clearly, emotion is involved. How important is something to you? I think we all have to take a deep breath, then communicating politely. And again, this happens personally and professionally with your family or with your colleagues, right? And take a step back and think about what at the end of this is my goal in communicating, and how, how can I take steps to achieve whatever goal that is and still maintain harmony in my relationships? So I think it really is taking time, taking deep breaths, being thoughtful, and then also, but not wavering in whatever it is that you're trying to communicate to somebody. So there's lots of ways, lots of paths to achieve the same communication goal, right? Okay, so I think we have so many more questions that I can answer. I have all these other ones, but I believe on the back end I'm going to be able to see in Zoom what these questions are, and I will do my best to follow up by email with all of our folks that attended so that we can see them. We are out of time, and I really appreciate you making the time to be here, because it shows your commitment to being a great steward of yourself, of Nexford University. If you ever have any questions or need support, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And know that we are here. We're committed to your continued career success and academic success. And I'm really excited to be in touch with you again soon. So looking forward, and thank you again for making the time. I'm so glad that you're here.